So I want to gear up to do some Halloween stuff this week. I've got at least one movie review coming out before Halloween and some other fun, spooky stuff. Please stay tuned for that. But this was kind of too good of news to not cover. Or maybe I should say too bad of news to not cover, depending on how you want to look at it. And that is that it looks like, and everything's in flux, everything can change, WB Discovery is not really going to be a thing anymore in the future. That Discovery has essentially decided to wash their hands of Warner Bros. Now, the reason I'm laughing is not because I'm like happy and giddy, like, oh boy, I hope someone loses their job, or I hope this project doesn't work out for X person. It's nothing like that. It's just kind of funny because Discovery came in guns blazing with their Warner Bros. Acquisition, I think really thinking they could turn things around from years of bad choices on WB's end. And I know the comics division is different with DC Comics, but still, kind of the same company tied together and things like that. But I think WB and DC Comics and like all of their subsidiaries have made a lot of poor choices over the years. Whether it's how they handled controversies they ran into, how they handled universes they were trying to build, like even the DCEU, with all of the creative clusterfucks around that, with bringing in Snyder, getting rid of Snyder, semi-bringing him back, moving on, like all this stuff, right? They've just made so many weird choices around WB. Even some of the promotions for their movies are bizarre, like the way they've handled them. Some stuff, it's like they won't push at all, then they'll be shocked it did terrible. Other stuff, it feels like the marketing budget for it was 3 times the amount of the movie, the amount you see of it, and then they're surprised it's not making enough money. Or even like Joker 2, where nobody asked for that. Why are we making this? And I say that as someone who kind of had to eat crow on Joker 2, because I actually defended its right to exist back when it was announced, and I said I was hopeful that it could be good, and then it turned out to just be kind of garbage. WB has been in a bad spot for a while, and there are multiple entities that appear to be circling it to buy it, but not only it also appears that they are going to be possibly selling off certain assets and splitting them off from WB at the same time or around the same time as the acquisition. Like that somebody might buy WB Games and then somebody else might buy WB proper. It's all in flux at the moment, but it's definitely a situation that could affect a lot of different things, very similar to the acquisition of something like Lucasfilm and LucasArts and all of these subsidiaries around Star Wars, and how that affected a ton of projects when Disney came in. So we're going to take a look at this for a few minutes. Some of this is speculative. A lot of it's based off of the Bloomberg article that came out, along with different sources. So I will leave those in the comments, in the description down below. Really quick, I did want to say thank you so much for your support on this, those of you who have. But again, we have new products up on cosmobunny.shop. I'll cover that more later. Coasters, keychains, trays, and more, all from recycled paper and resin, taking a piece of art from damaged books, giving it new life. Love you very much, those of you who have supported. Use code MOON for 20% off while that sale lasts. And I do have a question of the day for you in general, which is, if anybody bought WB or WB Games or any of that, who do you want it to be? I think for a lot of us, we think of the big evil, corpse, and we think, oh geez, not them, please. But like, who do you think would actually be a good fit? Let me know. Some of this I'm going to read off of a GameSpot article. Some of it I'm going to read off of another article from, I believe, was it Hollywood Reporter? Just kind of cracking down on a couple of these sources, and some of it's going to be summarized as well in my own thoughts. So WB Discovery did detail that they are planning to break apart or be sold, essentially, because also WB Games did essentially say that there are multiple people interested in either acquiring all of Warner Bros. Or just WB Games. And either of these would be very interesting. The parties were not named outright, but Bloomberg recently reported that Paramount submitted a $20 a share bid for WB Discovery, which the company rejected, thinking that it would be worth more than that. And Netflix is also possibly interested in this, which is one of them that I'm personally not excited for. With WB Discovery saying its board will evaluate a broad range of strategic options moving forward, as it essentially decides to sell the entire company or break it up in multiple sales or spin-offs. CEO David Zaslav said he's trying to find a buyer or multiple buyers to help unlock the full value of their assets. We continue to believe that our planned separation to create two distinct leading media companies will create compelling value. What's funny about this, though, again, is that they thought the same thing when they came in and they decided to buy it. They thought it would be a great idea and that they'd do a great job with it. And of course, as well, this is where we are. Now, that said, there are a couple of projects with Batman and Mortal Kombat, things like this that are already coming out. So things like Legacy of the Dark Knight for Lego Batman, that's launching in 2026, and that already has builds that are very, very far in. So something like that, it's not like we expect it to be canceled, right? You already have pretty much a guaranteed Batman game right there with Legacy of the Dark Knight for Lego Batman. Also, you have the Mortal Kombat Legacy Collection, which is coming out very, very soon. A lot going on with that, but that's being published by Atari, not WB. What's interesting about this, they already did cancel Wonder Woman, of course, kind of washed their hands of that. And in general, WB's longtime gaming boss, David Haddad, announced in January that he is leaving the company, obviously, but stays for now until the transition happened. But here's the thing with all of this. It kind of leaves us wondering what's going to happen. And that's really going to depend on who decides to buy it up. Now, I was actually talking to somebody on Twitter about this today, a user by the name of The Game Guy, who is very nice, and we were talking about, who potentially could buy WB. And I was also talking to my friend Alex from Podcast Now about this, too. And one thing that The Game Guy mentioned, which I agree with, is essentially that Paramount, which is one of the names that's been floated, is not necessarily good for this company because they are going to be the surefire, only chase success, not take risk company. And how do we know that? Well, when they acquired different things previously, like even their acquisition of Showtime, they decided to terminate a bunch of people's jobs. They decided to essentially cut costs in order to try to get short-term stock value. And they point out as well that 15% of CBS staff was axed in 2024, and also with Showtime that they had killed off a diverse slate for efficiency, which is something I noticed with Showtime, because Showtime had promised the cast of Dexter Original Sin a second season. Now, I don't know if they were in the contract phase yet or not, of writing the contracts or whatever, but this was during the flux where essentially it was going to Paramount. Paramount got it and said, nah, fuck you. Now, they didn't say it word for word, but they essentially told the cast to kick rocks and get out of here because they didn't want to focus on that anymore. And even a surefire hit like Dexter Resurrection, which was one of Showtime's best streamed things ever. One of their best shows in terms of performance they've ever done, if not their best. I don't remember which one it was. Dexter New Blood was also up there. That had to jump through hoops to even get a second season announced. It wasn't even a surefire thing it was getting a second season, even though there was a 3-season plan, and season 1 was breaking record numbers for these streaming services around Showtime and Paramount. And even then, they didn't pull the trigger right away. So I look at Paramount, and Paramount's going to be the company where, do I think you're not going to get Batman games anymore? No, I think no matter who buys this, you'll probably get Batman. But will you get anything else? That's the real question. Because Paramount is the surefire, don't take risks company. If they buy WB games or they buy WB in general and they get WB games, they're not going to be taking risks on other characters. You're not going to see things like a Wonder Woman game or a Justice League game necessarily or anything like that, or a Flash game. Now, you might say, okay, well, I'm already not seeing those things, and that's fair enough. But I'm saying for sure you will never see them under that kind of ownership because that's what they're going to do. With Netflix, if Netflix tries to buy this, they'll do what they did to things like Sailor Moon and certain anime that they've gotten a hold of, where they'll get the rights to different movies for anime or different productions, and then they will never release a physical release of it. They won't let it go anywhere else. They will just hoard those rights and put it on their platform. And they're even trying to do almost like a Netflix of games type platform. You know, that's something that they want to kind of push towards with moving into the gaming space. So now you have an issue with Netflix of media preservation. You have an issue of access. You have an issue of price gouging, because I guarantee you that just like how Netflix blew millions of dollars on productions nobody wanted to watch, and then their subscription services had to raise in price, they would do the same thing if they acquired WB. They'd say, oh, it's increased value. Now your ticket for entry, essentially, basically the amount you pay every month, your subscription will go up. Even if you were, like, even if you personally were not a fan of that, like, you're like, I don't like anything WB, they would still raise that price because you now have the option to watch those things. So both of these to me are not great options. But then, you know, I also look at, does WB need to do everything in-house? You know, does WB Games need to be the one to make every game for them? No. But lately, it seems like that's kind of what they want, is they don't want much of their stuff to leave that in-house umbrella. Now, that works for certain companies. Like, I think it really worked for LucasArts back during the 90s, 2000s, like that kind of era with Star Wars, where it was all basically done in-house for the most part. LucasArts was essentially on board with a lot of these things, right? And even when it wasn't done in-house, they were still on board with it. I think you could do something like that with WB Games, where maybe they're not even necessarily doing DC anymore. You know, maybe WB Games and those teams are bought by Company X, and then WB is bought by another company, and now you have games like Batman, Superman, stuff like that being made because they're being licensed out to interested developers. You know, that's something we've seen with Konami, and I think it worked really well. Like seeing Bloober come in and do the Silent Hill 2 remake. Would I have necessarily trusted a team at Konami themselves to do that after all these years? I don't know. I mean, it's possible they could have. You know, it's possible they could have made a really good Silent Hill game. I think they did a good job with Metal Gear Solid Delta. But it's also possible they could have completely dropped the ball. So going with a company that ended up doing a really good job, I think that was a good idea. For me, when I'm looking at this and people ask what's going to happen to my Batman games, I feel like it is a little bit of a narrow question, because I think you're always going to get those surefire things. Batman's always going to sell. You know, especially if you slap Batman Arkham on something and you bring that series back, people are going to buy it. You know, there can be people in the comments who say, it won't work, and I've talked about that, it potentially won't. There can be people in the comments who say, well, I wouldn't buy it. For every person who says that, there's like 10,000 people who will. So those surefire things we're going to keep seeing. You know, a sequel to Hogwarts Legacy of some kind. Another Batman game. But the question is, how greedy do they get with it? You know, you see Hogwarts Legacy, and you already had the ideas being floated around of make it super multiplayer, almost MMO, you can go buy stuff, things like that. And then you defeat the purpose of what made Hogwarts Legacy 1 so interesting for people, that it was a single player game, that you took place in a story at Hogwarts, all this stuff. You weren't relying on other people online. And so I look at that and I look at like Netflix or Paramount, and I'm looking at more greed, you know, more greed than we're already seeing. I'm looking at the DCU, and that also puts that up in the air, in a little bit of a flux, like James Gunn's DCU. Yes, it's a separate division essentially, but they're still Warner Bros. So how is that going to be affected? There's a lot of things here that I think are very troublesome with this sort of sale. But it's also possible it could amount to nothing, or end up in better hands where somebody is willing to embrace the diversity of what WB owns and try to push out into these different directions. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I think there is a lot of opportunities for a WB acquisition or a WB Games acquisition. Like, for example, there are things that they've completely ignored, like The Matrix. I think an acquisition could see, you know, maybe Matrix video games make a comeback. That could be something really cool they could do. There's a lot of stuff around WB that is not utilized currently and hasn't been for over a decade that could see a benefit from this. But if it's Netflix or Paramount, I also could see a lot of detriments unless it's a surefire thing. And a lot of gatekeeping on, you can't access this media unless you go through our hoops. Let me know your thoughts down there. If you enjoyed the video, you want to leave a like, subscribe, I appreciate you very, very much. I hope you have a fantastic day, as always. And I do want to say a huge thank you to those of you who have been supporting CosmoBunny.shop. Like I said before, one-of-a-kind items for one-of-a-kind people like you. Coasters, keychains, trays, and more made from recycled paper from damaged books like damaged comics, manga, magazines, and more. Take those things, turn them into a new piece of art using a small piece of the past, creating something new for your home, and recycling the rest. You can use code MOON before that sale runs out. I don't really know when it does, but probably in the next week or two. I would say especially after Halloween. That will get you 20% off your first purchase over there. Otherwise, DJAY123 will get you 15% off your first purchase if you're watching this after that. Have a fantastic day and stay shway.